They say the frontier swallows the weak and crowns the ruthless. But sometimes the West tells a quieter legend. Sometimes it whispers about the day fear met mercy under a broken sky, and how one trembling voice changed the shape of two lives forever. The first time the cowboy saw her, the sky itself seemed to flinch. Heavy clouds dragged low over the red desert, bruised and swollen, as if the heavens wanted to hide what stood beneath them. He had ridden out at dawn like he always did, following the same familiar trail along the canyon ridge, expecting nothing more than dust on his boots, the low calls of distant cattle, and the lonely creak of leather that came with miles of solitude. The land was still, almost reverent, the kind of morning that feels untouched by time. Then his horse stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Muscles locked, breath shuddering, ears pinned back flat against its skull. The cowboy felt the tension run up through the saddle before he even saw her. Near the mesquite trees, half framed by twisted branches and red stone, stood a figure that bent the world's sense of proportion. A woman easily 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered yet painfully thin, like a body stretched by fate rather than grown by nature. Her long black hair hung in tangled sheets, as if it had fought the wind for years and finally surrendered. Dust clung to her skin, and her shadow spilled across. The sand, like a warning no one had taught him how to read. His hand moved to his revolver without permission, not out of cruelty, but out of that ancient instinct that wakes faster than thought. Veer had always been a quicker draw than reason. She saw the motion. Slowly, carefully, she raised both hands, palms open, fingers trembling as if even the air had hurt her before. When she spoke, her voice broke on the first word, cracked and dry like ground that hadn't known rain in a lifetime. "Please," she said, "don't be scared of me." Tears cut clean lines through the dust on her face. "Please, don't be scared!" The words struck him harder than any gunshot. He had faced men who wanted him dead. He had faced wolves in winter, hunger in summer, and grief that hollowed out whole years. But he had never faced fear that sounded like shame. He studied her eyes, expecting threat, wildness, something he could name. What he found instead was exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from walking, but from being pushed away from every door you knock on. She told him her story in pieces, breath breaking between sentences. That her Apache people had called her cursed because of her size. That her mother wept when she was born and her father would not meet her eyes. That settlers fled when they saw her silhouette on the horizon. That traders laughed and tried to turn her into a traveling spectacle. That children screamed before they ever spoke. She said she had learned to cry without sound, so even her own breaking wouldn't trouble the world. The cowboy slid down from his horse slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. There was a strange calm in him now, the kind that sometimes rises when a man finally decides who he wants to be. He told her his name. It sounded small in the open air. Then he said he wasn't afraid, not of her height, not of her tears, not of the stories that had tried to shrink her soul. Her legs gave out before her breath did. She sank to her knees, and the ground answered with a soft tremor. Only then did he realize she had been standing on will alone. He offered her his canteen. She took it with shaking hands, drank like someone who had been rationing hope. He gave her food, watched disbelief slowly loosen its grip on her face, watched something cautious and fragile lift its head. As the sun climbed higher, burning through the low clouds, he helped her to her feet and guided her to his horse. The animal shuddered once, then settled, as if even it knew better now. She was too big for the saddle, too unbalanced by hunger, so he walked beside her instead, one hand steadying the reins, the other hovering near her elbow without touching. She was too human for chains. On the ride back toward his ranch, she spoke when the silence grew heavy, words spilling like they had been waiting years to be allowed out. She told him about sleeping in ravines, where the wind could not find her shape. About nights she buried herself in dust to hide her outline from the moon. About men who tried to cage her, to sell tickets to her existence. About mirrors she avoided, because they reminded her why the world refused her softness. He listened without interrupting, because sometimes listening is the bravest thing a man can do. When the ranch finally appeared, Small and stubborn against the endless land, she slowed. Her steps dragged. She said she would leave before dark, so she wouldn't bring him trouble. That she had learned how quickly trouble followed her shadow. The cowboy surprised himself when he told her she could stay, not as charity, not as curiosity, but as someone who deserved a place where footsteps didn't sound like judgment. The wind carried their silhouettes across the plain, stretching them long and strange across the red earth. And in that moment, there was a quiet invitation to anyone who might one day hear this story. Life on the ranch changed in ways the cowboy never predicted. Not with chaos, not with spectacle, but with meaning. The Apache woman moved through the land with a gentleness that contradicted her towering frame. She learned the rhythm of the fences, fixed them with hands that had known only rejection. She tended horses that trusted her instantly, as if animals recognized truth faster than people ever could. She spoke to the soil in a language older than fear, and things grew where she lingered. Neighbors came at first out of curiosity, then they came out of suspicion. They stood along the fence line, counting her height like it was a sin that could be measured. Whispers followed, then warnings, then the kind of looks that harden into decisions. The cowboy met them all with the same steady voice, telling them fear had already stolen enough from the world. It didn't stop the rumors. It didn't soften the threats that began to ride in with the dust. He felt them building like a storm that refuses to show itself. One night, it finally broke. Hooves thundered into the yard after sunset. Torches cut burning lines through the dark. Men dismounted with their faces already decided, saying she frightened their children, that she soured their land, that a woman like that didn't belong among decent folk. The cowboy stepped forward, heart heavy, mouth opening with words he had rehearsed 100 times. He never spoke them. She moved past him, each step deliberate, each breath shaking but held. The firelight climbed her frame, turned her tears into sparks. She said she was tired of apologizing for existing, tired of folding herself smaller for a world that refused to grow. Her voice wavered, but it did not break. The torches trembled in their hands, not from wind, from uncertainty. Something in her honesty cracked the story they had brought with them. One by one, the men mounted up. Shame followed louder than hooves. After that night, she cried less, then less than that. She laughed softly at first, like someone testing a forbidden sound. Then freely, a laugh that echoed off the canyon walls and made the ranch feel alive. She told the cowboy she had always believed fear was her destiny, that her size was a punishment written into her bones. He told her fear was a habit, not a truth. Seasons turned. She learned her letters, tracing them slowly, like each one was a trail she had never been allowed to walk. Children from nearby homesteads began to visit, bold enough now to ask questions instead of screaming. She showed them how to track deer, how to listen to the wind, how strength and kindness can share the same body. The cowboy watched her one quiet evening, standing against a sunset too small to contain her, and understood something he had never been taught. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to leave. Years later, when sickness swept through the valley, it was her who carried the weak, who lifted the fallen, who stood through nights that broke stronger men. Fear, the old tyrant, lost its grip one human moment at a time. Long after the dust settled, people told the story wrong, exaggerating her height and his bravery, missing the truth entirely. The truth was quieter. A woman once asked not to be feared, and a man chose to listen. If this story found its way into your heart, let it stay there, because stories only survive when someone walks beside them, the same way he walked beside her.